Have you ever wondered what life is really like on a group of islands standing alone in the cold North Atlantic? Where the sea surrounds everything, and the weather can change before you even have time to notice it. Far away from crowded cities, noisy streets, and busy highways, the Faroe Islands feel like a world suspended between the ocean, the sky, and dark volcanic stone. Here, tunnels cut through mountains and even pass beneath the sea, linking small communities that once seemed almost impossible to reach. Tiny villages rest below towering cliffs. Narrow roads wind through empty valleys, and in many places, the only sound you hear is the wind sweeping across the grass. At first, this place may seem too remote, too quiet, and too harsh for everyday life. But the longer you look, the more surprising it becomes. The Faroe Islands are not just wild and isolated. They are also modern, connected, and full of life. There are no massive shopping malls here, no McDonald's, and almost none of the things many people usually expect from the modern world. And yet, more than 50,000 people proudly call these islands home. So what makes them stay? What does daily life really look like in one of the most isolated places in Europe? In this journey, we will step into the Faroe Islands, a remote world in the Atlantic where isolation, beauty, tradition, and modern life exist side by side. Unlike big cities, where people can live next door to each other for years without ever truly knowing one another, life in the Faroe Islands feels much more personal, because isolation here does not push people apart. In many ways, it brings them closer together. A relationship does not always need a formal introduction to begin, since a glance, a nod, or a simple greeting on a quiet road can be enough to start a conversation. Everything feels natural, almost as if people have known each other for years, and that closeness is seen most clearly in the local habit of welcoming others into the home. It is not about modern restaurants or carefully prepared meals, but about a small kitchen, simple food, and ordinary conversations that slowly erase the distance between people. In a place this remote, living completely apart is not easy, because people depend on one another in quiet, everyday ways that gradually become part of normal life. That same spirit can be seen in the villages themselves, which are often small, modest, and built to fit the land rather than stand above it. In Gassadalur, where only around 16 people live, the homes are made to withstand strong winds and rough weather, often with grass roofs that may even be kept trimmed by sheep grazing above. These houses are not built to impress strangers, but to last through the climate. And in that simplicity, you can see something essential about life in the Faroes. Very little is there just for decoration, because almost everything has a reason, a purpose, and a quiet necessity in daily life. What the Faroes continue to preserve can be seen most clearly in traditions that look simple from the outside, but carry a deep sense of memory and belonging. The Faroese chain dance, for example, does not need a stage, bright lights, or musical instruments, because its power comes from people standing together in a circle, holding hands, singing old verses, and moving in the same rhythm. Unlike a performance made for an audience, this dance is really about being together, remembering those who came before and keeping a shared story alive through the bodies and voices of ordinary people. That same sense of connection is also part of what makes life here feel safe. Not because everything is controlled by rules, but because people learn to trust one another through the way they meet, speak, and help each other every day. In many other places, people lock their doors, stay cautious, and keep a certain distance, while in the Faroes, life feels more open because everyone understands they are part of a small community where people depend on one another. A woman from Thailand who moved here once described the happiness of living in a place with no pollution and no crime. And although that may sound almost impossible to outsiders, it reflects how different daily life can feel in a society built on trust. Even the fact that people can directly call the Prime Minister because his phone number is publicly available says something about the closeness of this place. Not every society has to be loud to be strong, and not every place has to rush forward to prove it is alive, because here the Faroes have chosen a quieter way to live. What makes the Faroes economy remarkable is not that it tries to do everything, but that it has learned how to do one thing extremely well. Built on traditional foundations, this small island society operates with a level of efficiency that is easy to underestimate from the outside. Yet the results tell a very different story. Average income is over $60,000 a year, higher than in Denmark and higher than in many places people would normally consider more developed. Taxes are relatively high, but in return, unemployment remains very low, often below 3%. And that stability is not just something written in a report. It can be felt in the way people live each day. There are not many people here, but almost everyone has a role. And because the community is small, survival is not built on constantly competing against one another, but on doing your part well and trusting that others will do the same. Unlike large cities, where opportunity often comes with pressure to move faster, do more, and keep chasing the next thing, life in the Faroes offers fewer paths, but also less of the feeling that people are falling behind. The pace is slower, yet it is not stagnant, because here development does not always mean becoming bigger or louder. It means staying focused, working carefully, and building a system that is simple enough to understand, but strong enough to last. Of course, relying so heavily on one industry carries risk, and the Faroes know that clearly. Yet it is a risk they accept, because in return, they have a way of life that is clear, stable, and deeply connected to what the islands can truly provide. Unlike places that announce themselves with bright skylines, crowded streets, or monuments built to be admired, the Faroe Islands reveal their power in a quieter and more unsettling way, as if the land itself prefers to be discovered slowly through wind, distance, and silence. Located in the North Atlantic between Norway and Iceland, this remote group of 18 small islands was shaped millions of years ago by ancient volcanic forces, leaving behind dark cliffs, deep valleys, and green hills that seem to rise almost directly from the sea. For many travelers, the first impression is not simply beauty, but the strange sensation of having reached the outer edge of the known world, where the ocean surrounds everything and the weather appears to decide the rhythm of life. There are roads here where a person can stand for several minutes without hearing engines, voices, or the restless noise of a city. Only the wind moving across open slopes and the Atlantic waves striking the cliffs far below. And yet, perhaps the most surprising question is not why this place feels so remote, but why more than 50,000 people still choose to stay here instead of leaving. What makes the landscape even more unusual is the absence of tall trees, because instead of forests, the islands are covered with grasslands that cling tightly to steep black cliffs, creating a raw and almost ancient image of the earth. Across this wind-shaped terrain, sheep appear everywhere, scattered across hillsides and roadsides as naturally as mist, outnumbering the people who live here and giving meaning to the old name Faroe, often understood as the Sheep Islands. In the Faroe Islands, the wind blows across the land almost year-round, carrying salt from the sea and making it difficult for trees to grow. And after a while, visitors begin to understand that nature here is not just something to admire, but something that quietly shapes the way people live. The weather is almost impossible to predict, because a morning can begin with clear light over the hills. Yet only minutes later, rain may roll in from the Atlantic. Fog may cover the road ahead, and strong wind can press hard against your skin. Locals often say, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. And although it may sound like a joke the first time you hear it, just a few days on the islands are enough to show how true it really is. There are days when people have barely adjusted to the morning conditions before the afternoon brings something completely different, and a traveler standing on a hillside taking photographs can suddenly watch the whole view disappear behind a thick wall of white fog. Rain falls through much of the year. The wind rarely stays quiet for long, and while summer brings days so bright and extended that night can almost disappear, winter reverses everything and leaves the islands with only a few short hours of daylight. With weather like this, life in the Faroes cannot run the way it does in a city, where people often expect schedules, roads, and plans to follow their own timing. Every plan here has to leave room for nature, especially on days when the wind grows strong enough to make opening a door difficult, or when traveling between islands is no longer possible simply because people want it to be. That is why people here do not really talk about conquering nature or fighting against it. Because life in the Faroes teaches a different lesson. You adapt, you wait, and you learn to move with the place instead of forcing the place to move for you. Perhaps that is why life here moves more slowly. Not because people have chosen to fall behind, but because these islands have taught them that every day must be lived with patience, flexibility, respect, and a willingness to live in harmony with nature. Some of the most familiar residents are not people, but sheep, moving freely across the hills, along quiet roads, and even near the smallest villages, as if the whole landscape belongs to them. They outnumber the people who live here, and when they step into the road, drivers simply slow down and wait. As if in the Faroes, everything just unfolds naturally. Along the coastal cliffs, especially during breeding season, another kind of life gathers in huge numbers, as tens of thousands of puffins return to remote places like Mykonos. From a distance, the cliffs can seem almost alive, not because the rock is moving, but because so many birds are nesting, flying, and rising into the wind. At first, this place may look too harsh for ordinary life, with strong winds, constant rain, rugged ground, and a deep sense of isolation from the rest of the world. But the longer people stay, the more they understand that this harshness is exactly what shapes life here, teaching people to slow down, stay flexible, and rely on one another. And that is when the real question begins. What truly keeps people here? Nature is constantly changing, but what keeps people here is not only the landscape such as the cliffs, the weather, or the wide open sea, but the way they stay connected to one another and to a distinct identity of their own. The Faroes began settling these islands around the 9th century, during the Viking Age, when people from different Norse regions carried their own stories, skills, and histories across the North Atlantic before building a life in remote places like this. Over time, those early settlers formed a small community with a strong sense of who they were. And even today, although the Faroe Islands are part of the Kingdom of Denmark, the Faroes have kept many things that remain clearly their own. They have their own flag, their own language, and a culture shaped by Old Norse roots. Yet these are not museum pieces kept only for ceremony, because they still appear in daily life as a quiet way of resisting being absorbed by the wider world. That identity also lives in food, in traditions such as fermented lamb dried by the ocean wind, a taste that may seem unfamiliar to outsiders but carries memory, climate, and a way of life tied closely to nature. One small story says a great deal about this spirit. When Faroese was not supported by platforms like Google Translate, people did not simply give up and switch to a more convenient language. Local authorities, volunteers, and ordinary speakers came together to record phrases, translate words, and build their own language data piece by piece. No one forced them to do it, but they chose to preserve what was theirs. Because in the Faroes, identity is not something people wait for others to protect. If you look at the Faroe Islands on a map, it is easy to imagine a place cut off from the rest of the world, with small islands scattered across the North Atlantic, separated by rough water, steep mountains, and weather that can change without warning. In many ways, that first impression is true, because the sea is always there. The mountains divide the land, and the weather can turn even a simple trip into something uncertain. But when you spend more time watching how people actually live here, that idea begins to change, because the Faroese do not move through daily life as if they are trapped between the ocean and the cliffs. Unlike many remote places where distance becomes something people simply accept, the Faroe Islands have chosen to deal with their geography in a very practical way. In other parts of the world, barriers like these often mean long detours, ferry schedules, waiting, delays, and a life shaped around what the landscape makes difficult. Here, they do not pretend isolation is not real, but they also do not allow it to decide everything. Instead, they face it directly, and the answer is not speeches or slogans, but roads, tunnels, ports, and connections that make the islands work together. That is what slowly changes the way you see this place, because the Faroes may still be remote, but they are not disconnected. At first glance, the economy of the Faroe Islands may not look especially impressive, because there are no massive cities, no crowded shopping districts, no endless traffic, and none of the noise people often associate with modern development. Everything feels quiet here, almost slower than the rest of the world, which can make it easy to assume that a place this remote must be falling behind. But that impression does not last long, because beneath the calm surface, the Faroes' economy is much stronger than it first appears. And what makes it even more surprising is that tourism is not the force keeping it alive. Visitors do come to these islands, drawn by the cliffs, the villages, and the feeling of standing at the edge of the North Atlantic. But they are not the foundation of the system. The real foundation is the ocean, because fishing and salmon farming are not just industries here. They are the backbone of an entire society. One local once explained it in the simplest possible way. Without fish, people could not live here. In a sentence like that, the whole story becomes clear. Because in the Faroes, the sea is not just a view outside the window or a dramatic background for travelers. It is work, food, income, identity, and survival. The climate is harsh, the land offers few easy choices, and out of everything the islands could depend on, the ocean remains the one resource strong enough to support life. Yet what truly sets the Faroes apart is not only that they rely on the sea, but how carefully they have built a system around it, from fishing and farming to processing and export, controlling nearly the entire value chain so that a small community can remain in charge of its own source of survival. No place is perfect, and the Faroe Islands are no exception, because beneath the calm surface that visitors often notice first, there are quieter realities that slowly reveal themselves. One of the clearest is the imbalance between men and women. At first, a gap of a few thousand may not sound dramatic, but in a community of just over 50,000 people, it is large enough to shape relationships, families, and daily life. Part of it comes from the kind of work found here, where fishing, aquaculture, and other sea-based industries are still physically demanding and still mostly carried by men. But the deeper reason is quieter. Many young women leave the islands to study, to work, and to experience a wider world. And over time, many do not return. In a place this small, those numbers stop being statistics and begin to affect the simple human question of finding someone to build a life with. As a result, many Faroes men have looked beyond the islands, and more families now include women from Southeast Asia, especially from the Philippines and Thailand. According to the BBC, more than 300 women from those two countries now live in the Faroe Islands. For them, moving here is not a small change, because it means leaving a tropical climate for cold winds, long winters, and months of darkness, while learning to belong in a society that moves slowly, closely, and very differently from the world they once knew. Life in the Faroe Islands may look calm from a distance, but living here comes with a price that visitors do not always see at first. Because these islands sit far out in the North Atlantic, most everyday goods have to be imported, which means even simple necessities can cost far more than people expect. Income is high, but so are the expenses, and maintaining an ordinary life often requires a careful balance between what people earn and what they must spend. Yet money is not the only tension that shapes life here, because some of the deepest debates come from traditions that have survived for generations. Whaling is one of the most controversial, and for the Faroese, it is not simply a hunt, but something tied to history, culture, food, and survival in a harsh environment where the sea has always decided what life could become. From the outside, however, the same tradition can look dangerous, brutal, and almost impossible to accept, especially in a modern world where many people see whales as creatures to protect rather than a source of food. That is what makes the Faroe Islands so complex, because they exist between two powerful truths: the memory of a small community that learned to survive through the ocean, and the expectations of a wider world that now judges those traditions from far away. There is no simple answer here, only a difficult space between heritage, survival, and changing modern values.